Good evening. Welcome to the Dole Institute of Politics. My name is Jonathan Earl. I'm interim director at the Dole Institute, and I'm also a professor in the history department. Robert David Sanders Novak has been a Washington insider for a long time. He is equally well known as a print columnist, writing inside reports since 1963, and as a television personality, appearing on many shows for CNN, most notably on three former programs, Capital Gang, Crossfire, and Evans, Novak, Hunt, and Shields. A native of Joliet, Illinois, he went to college at the University of Illinois, but left just one course short of graduation to become a full-time journalist. Worry not, the university awarded him sufficient credits from his work in journalism to qualify for a degree, and he finally became a Fighting Illini alumnus. During the Korean War, Novak served in the U.S. Army. After the conflict, he joined the Associated Press and became a political correspondent in Indianapolis. In 1957, Novak was transferred to Washington, where he reported on Congress. In 1963, he teamed up with Roland Evans to create the Evans-Novak Political Report until Evans' death in 2001. Novak is also, I should mention, one of many reporters mentioned in my favorite political book of all time, Timothy Krause's seminal nonfiction book about reporters covering the 1972 presidential campaign, The Boys on the Bus. Maybe I'll ask him about that in a few minutes. In 2003, Novak made news when he identified Valerie Plame as a CIA operative in his column. We will also ask about that. He is also author of several books, and I wanted to get the titles right. His first book was Agony of the GOP, 1964. In collaboration with Roland Evans, he's written Lyndon B. Johnson, The Exercise of Power, which I hear from the horse's mouth is his second best book after the current one, and The Reagan Revolution. He also completed Completing the Revolution, A Vision for Victory in 2000, and his new memoir came out to great acclaim this past summer, and it's in fact entitled Prince of Darkness, 50 Years Reporting in Washington, and there will be copies available in the back for purchase and to be signed by the author. Please give a warm Dole Institute welcome to Robert Novak. Welcome. Not bad.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Let me correct you.
Did I make a mistake already?
Yeah, just only two. One thing I always do is everybody's so tough on reporters, columnists for making mistakes, but people who introduce me always make at least two or three mistakes. It's hard to get things right. But anyway, the reason they gave me the degree was not my work in journalism, because I discovered the physical education courses that I took for no credit would be for credit today.
So like bowling and...
No, badminton.
Okay, badminton. Well, for all the undergrads...
The other thing is you left off one of my books, Nixon in the White House, The Frustration of Power.
Which I've read.
I'm
sorry for leaving off a book. Anyone who introduced me, I wouldn't want to leave off a book either. Let's get to the title. The Prince of Darkness. Is that something you enjoy being called? You don't appear particularly Mephistophelian to me.
Well, you don't know me that well.
No, I don't.
In 1959, I was covering the Senate for the Wall Street Journal. I was a ripe old age of 28, and a friend of mine who was covered it for the Washington Post, and I had to stay up till the last dog died every night and listen to these pompous senators with their blather. And I thought I was commenting there was much hope for Western civilization or the United States if those people were in charge. And I had a very low opinion of the political class, which I still do. And my friend, the fellow from the Washington Post, said, Novak, he said, you sound like the Prince of Darkness. You're so gloomy. And the word got around the Senate Press Gallery, and it stuck, although it's taken on a different meaning over the years, because I believe in limited government, low taxes, and individual economic freedom. And in Washington, that makes you the Prince of Darkness, I guarantee you.
Well, if I might say, it does seem like you relished the fight, the political scrum. Is that have something to do with it?
Well, it doesn't bother me much. I'm a Catholic convert. I'm 76 years old, so before too long, I'm going to another place. And what these people say doesn't bother me. But I suggested the Prince of Darkness. I thought it would sell books, and it made the a lot of people thought it was Harry Potter growing up, and so it made the New York Times bestseller list for 4 weeks, which none of my other books had. So it was a good title.
I figure I'll let you kind of answer this however you want, but how did you come by your political views, which it seems to me have changed subtly, but not a whole lot since you began your career?
They've changed considerably. It's a long progression. I change them all the time, and I grew up. My father was a chemical engineer. He was the only Republican in his family, and he hated Roosevelt because he thought he was taking bread off the table because of his feud against the utility industry. That's why my father was a great supporter of Wendell Willkie, 1940. He was a utilities executive. So that's how I started. You might be interested to know that my first memory of politics is we lived in Joliet, Illinois, and I was reading the Chicago Tribune, and there was a big picture of Alf Landon with a big sunflower badge on, and my father said, "Bobby, that's the next president of the United States." So he did carry Maine and Vermont, after all. So my father was a liberal Republican, and I grew up as one. And my first memory was the Willkie campaign, and then as a college student, I was for Eisenhower against Taft. But I was in the Army as an reserve officer in the Korean War, and I read Whittaker Chambers' Witness, which is one of the great books ever written. Those of you who have never read it, what a treat you have if you haven't read it. It doesn't matter how old you are. Read Whittaker Chambers. It really tells you what the fight against communism was like. So I became an anti-communist, although I was pretty liberal on economic, and my life has been a progression of moving toward the right. I think I knew I had entered the right wing when I voted in the 1976 Maryland Republican primary, where I lived, for Lyndon Johnson against Gerald Ford. I couldn't believe I was doing it, but I did it. And so I think I used to say I was becoming more conservative all the time, but I think I've also become not only conservative but libertarian. I get worried about the government being too powerful. Right. I get a little upset about this administration's use of the police power, and I thought there was a bad idea to invade Iraq. So I don't believe in nation building. I don't think you can turn Iraq into Kansas, no matter how hard you try. And I'm not a politician. I'm just a humble journalist who tries to break stories. And where I end up ideologically, I'm not following any party line.
Right. No, that's clearly true. Without parsing the conservative movement too much, I've heard you described as something called a paleoconservative, which would distinguish you from a lot of the people who people call neoconservatives, who didn't start out as anti-communists like you just described, who kind of flirted with left-wing politics and then made this hard right turn sometime, usually in the decade of the 1960s.
And the neoconservatives were very strong in this administration. They were for the invasion of Iraq. Yeah. They feel now, since we've done so well there, we should invade Iran. And so a paleoconservative is my dear friend Pat Buchanan is a paleoconservative. A paleoconservative is for trade protectionism. I'm a free trader. A paleoconservative hates the global economy. I'm for the global economy. Okay. We got to live it. A paleoconservative is for very strict immigration restraints. I'm for free immigration. So how am I a paleoconservative? Only in opposing the invasion of Iraq.
Okay, because that's something that I've seen applied to you. It didn't quite work for me either, but so we might have to invent an entirely new term for you.
A Novak conservative.
A Novak conservative. You've covered every president for the last 8 or 7, 8. You write, and I really did enjoy a lot of your book. Some of it more than others. You wrote in there about a particularly harrowing trip in President Kennedy's or in John Kennedy's convertible. If you could share that with us, that might sell a few of these.
I liked president. I like John F. Kennedy a lot. I thought he was a failed president. I think almost all presidents were failed presidents, with one exception, and in my 50 years. But I like John F. Kennedy. He was just a wonderful person. I hope that's not the reason I voted for him, because I did vote for him against Nixon in 1960 after I had voted for Eisenhower in 52 and 56. But I went out to cover him in Wisconsin, where he was campaigning against Hubert Humphrey, and he gave me a ride back on his family plane, the Caroline, and we got to Washington Airport, and he asked me where I lived, and I said in Georgetown. I had a little apartment. He had a mansion there. He said, I live there too. So he said, do you want to ride home? So just think of this. He's a presidential candidate. They didn't have Secret Service for presidential candidates in those days. And he said, I'll give you a ride. So just the two of us get in his convertible at National Airport, and he drives me to Georgetown, going around corners on two wheels, it seemed like, going as fast as he can. And I'm terrified. He's looking over at me. So he was a lot of fun, and I enjoyed his company.
One thing you didn't press in the book, and it's a great part of the book, a great passage, is do you actually think this was part of his personality, this tendency to recklessness? Some of the biographers have said so. In his
personal life, a great deal of recklessness. I think you could get away with a lot more as a politician in those days than you can now, and he tested it to the limit.
I'm going to actually ask a follow-up to that, though. I mean, why could you get away with so much more? Is it because the press corps looked the other way? Is it because people then rightly assume that it's no one's business who you're seeing after hours, or what kind of drugs you're taking?
All of the above. There was one see, this book, I've written all other previous books to order. You wanted so many pages, and I write so many pages. But this one is my life, and it took me 3 years to write about 50 years. And when I finished writing, it would have amounted to about 1,400 pages. And now that's longer than the Bible, not as good as the Bible, but so it took almost another year to cut it. And one of the things they cut was try to cut things that really didn't affect me that much and were not that important. But there was an event where President Kennedy, brought the whole press corps down from Hyannisport, his home, to New York, to the Carlisle Hotel, where he had a suite, for an assignation with a famous movie actress. And I don't think I'll give her name in public, but if any of you want to know it, you can come up and ask me later. And everybody in the press corps knew about it, and nobody wrote it. Nobody wrote it for years.
No gossip columnists?
No gossip columnists. And it was a different world then. You just didn't write those things that you knew about political leaders. Was that better or worse? Right. Probably it was worse, but that's the way it was.
You write in another fascinating part of this book that President Lyndon Johnson hosted your wedding reception. First, I'd love to hear more about that, if you would share it with us tonight. And then second, what did it mean to have a press corps that was so, for want of a better word, cozy with the powerful people that you were covering?
Well, those are two big questions.
I know. Okay. Take your time.
I fell in love with one of Vice President Johnson's secretaries. She had worked with him when he was majority leader, traveled 39 states in the 60 campaign, and in 1962 she agreed to marry me. That was 45 years ago. Our anniversary is next month. And anyway, those days, not true today, she had to quit if she was going to marry a journalist who covered the vice president. And he said he's sorry to lose her, but he'd give the wedding reception at his mansion in Northwest Washington. And she came back to me, and I said I didn't think that was a good idea. And she went back to the vice president. He said, okay. He said, I'll give the reception, and you and Robert don't have to come, which is typical Lyndon Johnson.
That worked, I'll bet.
So one of his, we had the reception. It was a very nice reception, and there's a picture of us leaving his mansion after it, way to our honeymoon, and one of his political cronies, after we got back from our honeymoon, went up to Geraldine, my wife, and said, well, now that Lyndon has given a party for you, we expect a lot better treatment from your husband. And he certainly did, and he certainly didn't get it, particularly after he said that to me. Now, the cozy relationship, it's a two-edged sword. A lot of the things that the excesses that the president, that the politicians had, we didn't write about. But on the other hand, we know a lot more that was happening than the reporters did today, because we were given greater access. I said, what good does it to know what's happening? It does plenty of good, because you know what to watch for and how you can better inform the public. I was the person in the Senate I was closest to was not Lyndon Johnson, who didn't really care for me that much, but the Republican leader, Everett McKinley Dirksen, one of the great figures in American politics. And he used to have, all politicians in those days would have there's a lot more drinking that went on in those days. He used to have a little drinking session every night, usually with 2 or 3 senators who were his friends, and sometimes he'd invite me in. He knew I would never write what happened there, but boy, I learned what to watch for reporting the Senate and later being a columnist. And I told this some years ago to Trent Lott when he was majority leader, and I was fairly close to Trent. And he said, boy, I wouldn't let any reporter, even you, in a session like that. And that's the truth. And so the reporters in those days knew a lot more that was happening, and the price of it was not to report all the excesses of the politicians.
So if you had a choice, would you go back to those days?
In a minute.
It's better now.
In a minute.
Okay. I mentioned the Boys on the Bus, which is this terrific book. Why is it that kind of political writing is increasingly rare?
Well, I didn't like that book, so I'm going to have to disagree with you. I thought it was it was full of mistakes. It was full of mistakes about me, which I talk about in the book. I thought it was this guy was a left-winger who was thought that the press had treated George McGovern shabbily and had caused the re-election of Richard Nixon. After all, Nixon only carried 49 out of 50 states. He carried every state but Massachusetts. So I didn't think it was much of a book, but it was very popular, particularly with the people who thought that McGovern was cheated out of the presidency.
No, that's fair enough. We've shared a few things today, some memories you have of Senator Dole's career in politics. We're in a building named for him. One thing I wanted to ask you about was about getting a leak for his presidential campaign in 1996, and we can start with that if you have have a page.
If I can find, keep talking.
But I also wanted to hear if you have any other memories that kind of stand out of Senator Dole's career in Washington when you covered him.
Senator Dole, they had a roasting of me for a spina bifida benefit that my friend Al Hunt put on, and he got, after some difficulty. See, I always try to be honest. I admired Senator Dole in many ways, and I would even like to think he admired me, but he sure didn't like me. And
the feeling was mutual?
Well, more or less. And so we had so he finally, Al Hunt finally convinced him he should give this, I thought I had this marked, but I'm not too competent. He thought, he gave a roast, and I would tell you that it was the funniest, meanest roast. And I have been roasted up and down, but there's nobody that can roast you like Bob Dole. What he had done was he had obviously written it up, and he had written it up and then memorized it, and it was I'll find this eventually, and it was just a.
So what made that so memorable? Because you said he'd been roasted dozens of times.
Well, because he was sarcastic and he made me look like an absolute fool. Yeah, I mean it was incredible. And okay, now wait a minute. Thought I had all this here.
Did the Random House pay for an index?
Well, there's so many Dole references in here.
Okay.
All right. Keep going to the next subject.
I can work on this. You did mention another story that I'm trying to remember about Senator Dole. Did you cover him when he was first elected to the Senate?
I covered him all the time.
Okay.
Here it is. Okay. On the morning of Thursday, August 8th, 1996 in San Diego, the week before the Republican National Convention, I was seated in the little wooden building devoted to CNN's weekend shows. Somebody on the other side of the room yelled out, "Novak, Bob Dole on the phone." I was sure it was a gag. Dole had last placed an unsolicited telephone call to me in 1988, that was 8 years before, to complain about a column. It had been weeks since Dole had clinched the presidential nomination, and not a week went by that I did not complain, in print or on the air, what a bad idea his candidacy was for the grand old party. I'm sure Dole thought I hated him, but I just thought he was a poor candidate. I admired him as a fighter, not only for overcoming his terrible war wounds, but as in his determination to become president. The 1996 campaign was Dole's fourth for national office, and surely his last try. It was Dole on the phone all right. He got right down to business, informing me he was down to his last 3 picks for vice president. "What would you think if I named Jack Kemp?" he said. It was a politician's way of leaking to me that he had in fact picked Kemp. Dole indicated to me that the announcement was imminent. The telephone conversation lasted no more than 5 minutes, and I rushed to the CNN studio in its convention complex. I was on the air live within 10 minutes broadcasting the news to the world. The Kemp solution was the biggest exclusive I ever gave CNN. Why did Dole pick Kemp? Because he was shrewd enough to know the convention and indeed the party needed a lift. Kemp might have been persona non grata to the party's insiders, but he was immensely popular among the delegates. Roaming the convention floor, I found Kemp's selection energized the convention. I think Dole showed how much he wanted to be elected by picking him as picking as his running mate a man he disliked and whose ideology he disdained. But why would Dole leak the story to me, considering his personal distaste for me? Because he knew I was close to Kemp, would be thrilled by his selection, and that I might even put in a kind word for Dole. He was right. In my column running the first day of the convention, I noted that Dole's closest aides all argued against Kemp. Then I added this. Outside Dole's inner circle, Kemp's selection was exhilarating, not merely because it rehabilitated the successor of Barry Goldwater and Ronald Reagan, that's Kemp, but because of what it revealed about Dole's largeness of spirit.
Okay, that's great. Now, for those of us who aren't professional journalists, Bob Dole calls you and says, "What would you think if I chose Kemp?" And you go on the air saying, "Dole picks Kemp."
Yeah.
Like, how do you make that?
I know.
That leap.
It's because he wouldn't do it.
Okay.
He hadn't talked to me in 8 years.
So you were 100%
I mean, he hadn't called me. I mean, I talked to him in 8 years. He had never phoned me unsolicited.
Right.
And what he was doing was he was giving me a lead. You have to have some brains in this business. It doesn't act like it sometimes, but you have to have you see, the thing is, sometimes you miss the signal. I have another story in here where I'm not so smart. In 1992, just before the 1988, just before the Republican convention in New Orleans, I'm talking to Lee Atwater, who was then the Republican, who was then the campaign manager for George Herbert Walker Bush. And so we're talking about Bush has clinched the nomination. Who is Bush's successor going to be? And everybody thinks it's going to be Kemp or Bob Dole, Kemper Dole. So I say, we're talking to Atwater's trying to feed me a story, giving some bum information about Dukakis, which I was smart enough not to print. But I got him on the phone. I said, Lee, who's it going to be? What's the difference between Dole and Kemp? And he says, well, he says the vice president likes Dole better, but he thinks Kemp could help the ticket more, but Kemp is such a pain in the butt that he doesn't know whether he wants him. He says, but you know, he said, this is just speculation. He says, strictly speculation, Novak, he said, but we're looking at a guy who could give us Kemp without Kemp. That is, Kemp's dynamism, his conservatism, without being such a difficult person. I said, who's that? He said, Dan Quayle. I said, Dan Quayle? He said, just speculation. So I hung up, and I figured, what is he doing? Is he leaking me something, or is he just playing around with me? So I'm on deadline. I have to do something fast. I made a couple of phone calls. People say, Dan Quayle, you've got to be out of your mind. He would never name him as vice president. He's a lightweight. Nothing could happen. So what I did is I put it in the last paragraph of a column. Is it Kemp or Dole, Dole or Kemp? And I say, of course, some people are talking about Kemp without Kemp, that being Quayle. Atwater was trying to tell me that they had picked.
It was already a done deal.
It was already a done deal, and I was too dumb to get it. So to be a good reporter, it isn't just being ready for the leak. It isn't just asking the right questions. You've got to decode the coded material from politicians, because they're very devious people, and they speak in ciphered language. And it's not something that I was in the Army Security Agency where we used to try to decode enemy traffic, but it's not that kind of decoding. It's a different kind.
I guess Mr. Novak didn't read the memo that the Dole Institute's motto is politics is an honorable profession. And instead, it's a devious profession kind of somehow. But, maybe they're both right. Tell us about some stories besides the one that we'll get to in a little while, the Wilson Plame story, that you've broken in your column. You've definitely had a fair number.
Well, one of the big stories I ever had was I got a speech that this was in the early in 1976. I got a speech from that had been given by a man named Helmut Sonnenfeld, who was the consul of the State Department. It was a secret speech that he had given to American diplomats in Europe, in which he had said that the biggest danger to starting World War III is the fact that not U.S.-Soviet conflict, but the fact that the Soviets had not established an organic union with the satellite countries. In other words, the U.S. policy should be to bring them closer and to make sure we never talk about the liberation of the satellite countries. Boy, what a story, see? So I write the story, and it is Jimmy Carter thought he had died and gone to heaven with that kind of information. It was the Kissinger foreign policy, and it really hurt Jerry Ford. So they kept telling Jerry Ford, tell him, it was a big story, tell the American people that we don't believe the union of the Poles and the Romanians and the Hungarians to the Soviet Union is forever. And he says that he didn't want to do it because it would hurt Henry. Henry Kissinger was Secretary of State. So finally they have a debate in San Francisco, and they tell him, if this comes up, we're losing the race to Carter. You've got to repudiate the Sonnenfeld Doctrine. So he's finally asked a question about it, and he says, the Soviet Union has never had control over Eastern Europe. See, I call that a political spoonerism that only Jerry Ford could have been capable of. And then it took him 4 days to admit he made a mistake.
Right. the combination was pretty devastating. Now, as you tell that story, I remember from my very brief days as a college journalist that a news reporter, keeps his or her views as much out of the copy as possible. You're an opinion columnist.
That's right.
And yet you're still a reporter. Do you ever get into a situation where you have bad information or negative information about a candidate? I'm assuming you supported Jerry Ford in 1976.
I voted for him.
Where you don't want to get something out there in your own column, but you have this nugget of news.
Many times I do that, and it makes me, it gives me the worst of both worlds. People don't love me anyway, so then they love me all the least. This was really true, Jonathan, in the case of Watergate, where
right.
I wrote over 200 columns on Watergate. I think I was really ahead of the gang in saying how that Mr. Nixon was not playing it fair, and I had voted for Mr. Nixon twice in 1968 and 1972. I'd been very rough on McGovern, and so the McGovern people never forgave me, but the Nixon people detested me. So, but I'm not in for a popularity contest. I'm trying to give facts which I think the American people deserve to know, and that's what I try to do. I'm not a cheerleader, and some people get confused and think instead I'm the Prince of Darkness.
Going more into contemporary politics now, actually this is not really a political question at all, but what grade would you give the press corps over the past 6 years? Have they done a good job, or have they made it even worse?
I think it all depends. I think they have done a good job on reporting, by and large, the war in Iraq. I have grave admiration for the reporters that go there and risk their lives. When I turned, I'm 76. I'd been going to wars for years and years. When I turned 60, I decided that's enough getting shot at. I gave it up. But I have grave admiration for them. I think some of the I think there's a gray area on whether material should be released on the spying and the intercepting of conversations of American citizens. I have a great difficulty in Big Brother government knowing what we're saying and doing. I think they should be monitoring possible suspects of terrorism. So there's a conflict there. But I think by and large the media has done a good job. I think on the other hand, the political reporting I think is very much biased toward the Democrats. I think it was biased toward them in the last campaign. I think it's biased now. A recent study shows that there's more stories about the Democrats, and they are less negative than the stories are about the Republicans. I did a paper at Kenyon College in 1972 that kind of divorced me from the mainstream of journalists, where I said that the new media were biased on the left, that this was a real problem, and they ought to be more straight in reporting the news. I think it's gotten worse since 1972. So I guess I give a mixed report card. I give them a failing grade on politics and a pretty good grade on covering the war and the war against terrorism.
To go back to what I said in my introduction, I think you are almost unique in that you are this kind of a dean of political opinion reporters, but you also, I think, a reason why many people here are here tonight you're on television, and you have been on television an awful lot, especially after the advent of CNN. And obviously, you've been on McLaughlin, you've been on Meet the Press plenty of times, but when I think of Bob Novak, I think a lot of CNN. You were there at the very beginning of the kind of 24-hour news cycle. How has CNN and the 24-hour news cycle and the cable channels changed news gathering and reporting and even opinion writing?
Well, it's a moving picture. CNN was all alone in the cable news business when we started. And I think we did some really good work. I was with CNN for 25 years. I think we did a really good job of covering politics. A lot of people learn their politics watching Crossfire, watching Inside Politics, watching Evans and Novak program, watching the Capital Gang. I think they got their knowledge of it. But I think today, but Fox came along, and as I write in the book, I almost left Fox 8 years before I left CNN. Actually, I almost joined Fox in a similar role, but couldn't work out because of contract restrictions I had with CNN. As Fox added support and began to overtake and then pass CNN, the new executives were brought into CNN, and I think they made the wrong decision. They killed all their political programs, and the aftermath of that was really, I think, they were still paying me a lot of money, but when they weren't using me on any programs, I kind of figured my days were numbered. That's a pretty good conclusion. And so after 25 years, I left CNN and went on Fox as a contributor, where I am a contributor. I don't do all that much, but neither Fox nor CNN really committed during the day to doing much political news anymore. So the idea of the 24-hour news cycle and everybody running in with news bulletins on politics just doesn't exist. What you find is this poor girl. I mean, Fox did an awful lot. This poor girl was apparently abducted and murdered in Aruba. Just hours and hours and hours, nonstop. We have all kind. Paris Hilton was a huge story. Is a driver's license going to be committed? And there's very little political news compared to what it was in the old days. There's no straight political programs on either program, on either station during the day.
But hasn't that moved to the internet, to political blogs?
I think that's what it is. And this is,
I never watch CNN.
Or Fox. And the programs on CNN in my day, of course, they had a high level of journalistic integrity. I mean, there was nobody could just go on and say anything. I think they were almost too cautious at times. I write about in the book, I had, from the horse's mouth, I had the idea that Geraldine Ferraro had been selected for vice president in 1984, and I couldn't get a second source immediately, and we lost the scoop because of it. But on the internet,
though.
Pardon?
Did you put it in your column?
Well, it was too late for that. It went out immediately on the other networks. But on the blogging, there's no quality control. There's no accountability. There's no supervision. Anybody can put anything they want on a blog. It goes out, and there is everybody is blogging now who is writing for regular magazines, and they tend to put stuff out quickly. There was a case where the Politico, which is a daily newspaper, which is based strictly on finding and getting political exclusives. Everybody, all the political junkies read it. How many of you read the Politico? Anybody here read the Politico? Very few. But everybody in Washington reads it. And, of course, they made a terrible blunder in which they moved too fast on when John Edwards' wife was diagnosed with a recurrence of cancer. They said he was getting out of the campaign. It was bum information. And in normal reporting techniques, you would have been very careful in making sure you got that from the campaign instead of a secondary source. And they went straight out on the blog with it. And then some of the cable networks, not Fox, immediately then repeated that mistake.
Wow. Let's move up to 2003. You start this very long, very personal memoir with a chapter on the Valerie Plame affair. First of all, I want to ask you why you did that. And most memoirs go chronologically, and that would happen closer normally to the end of the book than the very beginning. And second, is there anything you wish you had done differently that early summer of 2003?
The reason I put it in the book was that unless I live far beyond my allotted years, whenever I do die, my obituary will have Valerie Plame in the lead. It's not the most important thing I ever did, but it'll be there. It is what it is. So I think if I had just waited to the end of the book, people would be thumbing in the index, find what does he say about Valerie Plame? Is he ducking the issue? So I had to put it first.
Okay.
Is there anything I wish I'd done differently? There's a lot of little things I wish I'd done differently. The big question is, do I wish I hadn't used your name? I don't know. Those are hard questions. I think it was a valid journalistic, based on what I knew, based on what I was given, based on the facts. I think it was a valid news story that I wanted to use to put her name in it. Would I, if I known all the difficulty it caused me, would I have done it? How can you answer those questions? I never dreamed it would cause that much trouble, and so it's if somebody had painted that picture ahead of me of that would cost me $160,000 in legal fees, that it would sour my relationship with CNN, that it would cause me any amount of difficulty and anguish. I don't know.
Yeah.
How can you tell?
Your source for the Plame story was Richard Armitage, number 2 at the State Department. He is not the same source that spoke to 2 other journalists that are closely linked with this story, with Matthew Cooper of Time Magazine and Judith Miller of the New York Times. Does that suggest to you that there was an orchestrated effort in the White House to smear Ambassador Joseph Wilson, his wife, anyone who had a chance to cast aspersions on the weapons of mass destruction, the nuclear weapons story that was coming out of, supposedly out of Saddam's Iraq? I
don't believe so, because where did they get the name, as it turns out? There was an unclassified memo. By unclassified, I don't mean it was a public memo, but it did not have a security classification on Joseph Wilson's mission to Niger, on the report that the Iraqis had visited there to inquire into the possibility of purchasing yellow-cake uranium to build atom bombs. In that unclassified memo, it was mentioned that his wife, who worked at the CIA, had suggested the mission. That's where Armitage saw it. That's where these other people saw it. And how did Armitage happen to say it to me? Did he call me in to tell me that? Not at all. It was a long background conversation.
The first you'd ever had with him?
First I'd ever had with him. The 2 of us sitting in the room, no tape recorder, no notes, no other aides, and talking about a lot of things. He was speaking very frankly. I have never given the details of the things he said. He was known to be a gossip, and boy, he was a good gossip. He was telling me a lot of things that were going on in the administration. He was not happy with the administration about the invasion of Iraq. Either was I. That's one of the reasons I wanted to see him. And as we went on, we got on the question of the Wilson mission to Niger, and he told me some of the details of that. He was not at all critical of Joe Wilson. Gave me some interesting things, and I said, why would they send Joe Wilson? He was a Clinton White House staffer for the National Security Council, no experience in intelligence, no experience with weapons of mass destruction. Why would they send him on a sensitive intelligence mission? And he said, his wife works for the CIA, and she suggested it. I said, yeah, she does? And he said, yes, in the Division of Weapons of Proliferation, Anti-Proliferation Division. And I said, gee, that's interesting. He said, that's real Evans and Novak, isn't it? Of course, my partner was long gone, but he meant that was the kind of inside dope we used to deal in. And then we went on to other subjects. And I wrote the column about Joe Wilson's mission, not at all critical of him, trying to tell him what it was about, some of the details that had not gone to the public. The kind of columns I always write, try to give details that haven't appeared otherwhere. And incidentally, I said his mission was suggested by his wife, who works at the CIA.
And her name was right there in Who's Who.
Well, he gave, Armitage had said her name was Valerie, and I wanted to double check if her name was really Valerie, so I looked up his name, Joe Wilson's name in Who's Who, and it said wife Valerie Plame, and I put it in. That was also when she was doing covert operations in Europe before she was called back. That was her code name was Valerie Plame. What I also didn't know at the time, that the time I wrote the column was, maybe I would have been a little more critical, was that Joe Wilson had contributed $2,000 to the year 2000 Gore campaign, and that was double the amount that was permitted at the time. $1,000 was returned to him, and the very day it was returned, he had his wife Valerie give the $1,000 to Gore, and she listed as her name a fictitious company that didn't exist, and that is not the way a cover company for a secret agent works. She in fact did not work in this company. The company didn't exist. What she did is she drove every day to the CIA building. Now, I think it's very hard to be a covert employee if you're going to that building and is seen entering it and leaving it once every day, and you haven't been out of the country on an assignment in some time. Now, I did know also that Joe Wilson in 2000 was on the staff of as an advisor for the Gore campaign. So the idea that that this guy is running a mission for the CIA, I thought was extraordinary.
But to get back to an earlier question I asked you about the press corps, and you gave the press corps a pretty good grade on covering Iraq. I do not dispute any of your details about the Plames and her job and where she went to work and what front company she said she worked for. Was the lie, and you say you were also skeptical of the Iraq war, that Iraq was on the verge of gaining nuclear weapons, and that despite Iraq's inability to deliver those weapons on our cities and on our country, that somehow this posed a grave and gathering threat. That does seem to me to be not true, and it ended up in the State of the Union address in 2003, and somehow those words got out there and they were not true.
Well, what did he say in the State of the Union address in 2003?
I'm trying to remember. It's been a while, but that Saddam Hussein had sent people to Niger in Africa to get yellow cake uranium to build a bomb, and that he's on the verge of getting nuclear weapons. Condi Rice then goes on, I don't think your show, but a show on that Sunday, and said, we don't want the smoking gun to be a mushroom cloud.
He didn't do it on that show. Don't forget that Colin Powell, who
I don't mean to excuse Secretary Powell either.
I don't think you think he lied. I don't think you think he.
I think he's used a very popular barnyard epithet to describe what was given to him by David Addington and by the Vice President's office when he went up to New York to give that speech at the UN.
Yeah. But let's find out what he said. It was 16 words. And it wasn't what you said. I'm going to read you what he said.
I made 3 mistakes tonight.
I wanted to say what the President said. The President said this: the British government has learned that Saddam Hussein recently sought significant quantities of uranium in Africa. That's what he said.
Is it true? Maybe
the British government has learned that? He got it from the British government. That was about...
But he also got from his own mission, whether or not he gave money to Gore, I grant you, that might be true, that wasn't true, and it got in there anyway.
He said it was unlikely. And when I talked to the CIA, when I wrote the column, they said it was not a definitive report. It was an oral report.
Right. And
now the written report that's based on his oral report has been declassified and is out, and it wasn't definitive. It was a vague thing. What was this about? What all this was about? This is a funny situation for me, as I'm often in a funny situation because I'm trying to give the truth, and I'm not making a point because I don't believe. I said many times on CNN and sometimes in the column that I didn't believe there were weapons of mass destruction. I said so. I said that after Secretary Powell's speech because I was based on UN inspectors, but I don't believe that the mission by Joe Wilson was a significant factor. This was built up. Right. By the way, my column, Jonathan, got very little attention when it was first put.
Until later, right.
Until later.
That's
and
true.
I think there was a decision made that this was going to be used because the left-wing magazine, The Nation, which was really ironic because The Nation had been opposed to the law making it illegal to uncover the name of a secret agent. They started building this up, and the president's critics in the Senate started building it up, and they decided that this was the lever to hammer Bush with, and it was a strictly political thing. Now, Joe Wilson, when the report by the Senate Intelligence Committee came out under Senator Roberts of Kansas, that she, contrary to what Joe Wilson had said, that they had documents from the CIA showing that she had suggested her husband. She still denies this in her new book, but the
that certainly doesn't strike me
there.
as anything unusual for the way Washington works. I grew up in that town. That stuff happens all the time.
But it really is amazing to me that in her new book she said that the CIA didn't have funds to send a regular operative to Africa. I mean, I believe there were enemies in the CIA, and still are, who are very hostile to President Bush, and I think they were trying to use this as a lever to really whack him as much as possible.
I'm not going to dispute that, and we'll move on because other people might ask about it too. My last question before I open this up to questions from our audience is: you've said some very nice things about Congressman Ron Paul, who's running for president as a Republican. You haven't endorsed him, as far as I can tell, but you have endorsed him?
No, I haven't endorsed him.
But you said some very good, kind things. Do you think he has a chance in the Republican field?
No.
Okay.
I like a lot of the things Ron Paul says. I like a lot of things I say. But it doesn't mean I should be president, and I don't think it means Ron Paul should be president either.
Do you think he's going to have an impact on the race beyond being the candidate?
Only if he were to. He has a following. Only if he were to run as an independent candidate, and he says he will not.
He keeps saying that. But maybe that will make it into a future column if he can signal the difference in the coded language we talked about.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to. He's the only Republican candidate who is against the invasion of Iraq because it's a fear factor. After the nomination, if you want to be nominated by the Republican Party, you should not be against the invasion of Iraq. If you want to be nominated by the Democratic Party, you should not be for the invasion of Iraq. That's why Hillary says that what a terrible mistake it was that she voted for it. And that's the way politics. I don't even criticize the politicians for that. That's the way the world is.
It certainly seems like it. We have two student workers who have handheld mics. If you have a question for Mr. Novak, please raise your hand. They'll find you. Please, no speeches.
No questions.
I can't believe it. Here's one in the front row here.
Oh, that's questions.
And then Professor Lieberman has one as well.
Mr. Novak, what's your predictions about the Bush administration and the issue of attacking Iran? How likely or unlikely do you think this is?
Well, I don't believe that they've completely taken leave of their senses. I think they're trying to play games, and because obviously they have war gamed this for about 20 years an attack on Iran. They war game everything. There's nothing wrong with that. My dear friend Seymour Hersh keeps writing these articles in the New Yorker about plans to attack Iran, and they have plans to attack everybody. I'm sure they've got a plan to attack the United Kingdom, somewhere, but it doesn't mean it's going to happen. But anyway, they had these more serious war plans on Iran, and they always end up, they have war games as a catastrophe for the United States. Really very difficult, much more difficult than attacking Iraq. So they're not talking about a ground, they're talking about an air attack. And the air attack would be to get out the nuclear facilities. And it's all a sort of a blur back to the days when you've probably seen it. How many of you ever watched the Military Channel? Any of you watch the Military? It's a great channel. I love watching it. It's better than ESPN even. And you watch the Military Channel, and they have one thing about the Israelis attacking the Iraq reactor. And yes, and they take out the Iraq reactor, and that sets back Saddam Hussein for a long time. But it's not the same situation. We don't know where their reactors are. They have several reactors. We can't pinpoint them. So are we going to carpet bomb Iran and put on ultimatums? I don't think that's in the cards. And then I hear a lot of people, you mentioned neoconservatives, yes, neoconservatives telling me that if we attack Iran, the people will run into the streets and embrace us.
Sounds familiar.
That does sound familiar.
No, Norman Podhoretz, who is now advising Rudy Giuliani's campaign, believes we should start bombing Iran as soon as is logistically feasible. I believe I got that quote exactly right.
That's right. So I think it's unfeasible, and General Abizid got himself in a lot of trouble, not in command anymore, and what she said that we could live with in Iran with a nuclear weapon. The idea that we're going to attack every country we don't like that has nuclear weapons is, I don't know where we end. Obviously, what we're doing with North Korea is we're making deals with them so they don't have nuclear weapons, and that's what I think some people want to do with Iran. The trouble with Iran is that they take this little president seriously. What is his profession?
I think he's probably a professor.
He is a professor, exactly. And that's the biggest joke in the world, to take him seriously. The mullahs run that country, and he's a little mouthpiece. And who says anything, they rigged the last election. And see, one of the problems with this country is that we think everybody, that all these countries are run like Kansas. That you have an election, and the people win the election, run the election. If they lose the next one, they're out. And everybody enjoys that process. But anybody who knows the history of Russia knows they're never going to have a democratic country. It's not in their DNA. They don't have the genes for it. And so they like to have a czar, and his name and they got one. The name may be Stalin, it may be Khrushchev, or it may be Putin. But they don't want democracy. And he's very, very popular right now. There are only two figures that I know of in the history of Russia who held power and were genuine Democrats. They were Gorbachev and Yeltsin, who were rivals. And their popularity, they were both incredibly unpopular people.
Popular in the United States, but not so much in Russia.
That's right. And so the idea that everybody in Iran wants to have well, shall we say, Sam Brownback as their leader, that just is not the way the world works.
Fair enough. Another professor.
I guess I'm interested at the beginning of this conversation, John talked to you about your evolution politically from being a more liberal Republican to a conservative Republican or a libertarian Republican, and you mentioned that you had a spiritual evolution as well. And I'm wondering if one influenced the other, because I noticed, for example, our senator seems to have gotten more conservative and has also been a recent convert to Catholicism. I'm wondering if these two things are interactive.
Well, I think that's the way the Holy Spirit may work. Senator Brownback's up on me, though, because his wife is a Protestant, and so he goes to both Catholic and Protestant services on Sunday, and I just go to Catholic, so he's up on me on that. I think no, but in all seriousness, I think that may have be a factor in it. I converted to Catholicism at the age of 67, which people say, isn't that too late? Really, it's never too late. And it's I've had for an old man, when a lot of people my age are sitting on the porch drinking lemonade, I've had a lot of turbulence, and I think my faith has helped me get through it nicely. Thank you.
I know we have some back here, Mark.
Mr. Novak, we just turned down 3 coal plants in Kansas because of the release of carbon dioxide. But how long can the administration continue to play hardball with climate control, or whatever we want to call it?
I couldn't hear that.
It's an environmental question. Recently, a member of our administration here in the state turned down permitting for big coal-fired power plants in the western part of the state. The question, I believe, is how long can this administration, you said, play hardball or deny that global warming is a problem?
Well, I don't think global warming is a problem. I think the statistics have been skewed. Senator Inhofe of Oklahoma gave about a 3-hour speech or a 4-hour speech on the Senate floor, which did you read about it?
I know plenty about Senator Inhofe.
But did you read his 4-hour speech?
I didn't read his 4-hour speech. No, I did not.
Because you didn't, because nobody covered it. That's why you didn't
Okay,
read it out.
let me rephrase the question. Is he not out of the scientific mainstream?
No, he's out of the liberal mainstream, and there's a lot of conservative scientists. He was citing only conservative scientists, and I think he has a compelling data to indicate that over the long course of history, global warming is not a particular problem. I think what the whole situation with global warming is about is to try to. A lot of liberals don't like the way people live. I don't like people. I'm enough of a libertarian that I don't like people telling me how to live, and I didn't eat my salad tonight because I don't like salad. I didn't eat my vegetables because I don't like vegetables, and I don't exercise. I've had cancer 3 times. I think I have a 4th cancer coming up. I'm 76 years old, and I feel pretty good for a person that age. And I don't like Governor Huckabee telling me I should lose weight, and because he was a fat guy and had to lose 100 pounds. I don't like him telling me how to live. I don't like people telling me what kind of car I should drive. I've driven 14 convertibles in my life. I've had 1 hardtop car, which I didn't like, and I now have a black Corvette that goes 160 miles an hour and gets about 12 miles to a gallon, and I like it.
Somehow from Senator Inhofe to convertibles. I don't know. Back here, Clarissa has somebody.
No, the point I was trying to make, if you don't get it, Jonathan, is that people with global warming are trying to take my car away from me. They're trying to
I
tell us how to live.
I haven't seen anybody trying to take your car away.
Oh, yes, they are. I guarantee you.
All right, in the back there.
Could you please tell me, has it been established who actually paid for Wilson's trip to Africa and who actually directed him to go?
Who actually paid for Joe Wilson's
trip to Niger?
He was sent as an agent to the of the CIA. I don't know whether he put in an expense account or not. I have no idea. It was an official. I don't think it's important. He was on an official mission.
Yeah.
Whether he paid for it or
Your government
the CIA paid for it, I don't know. He was not going there as a private citizen. Though. He was going as a representative of the Central Intelligence Agency.
And he'd been on embassy staffs in several West African
He was an ambassador to Gabon.
Mark.
Mr. Novak, who do you feel is the most underappreciated politician you've ever covered, and who is your all-time favorite politician?
Well, underappreciated politician. That's good. I think maybe Senator Tom Coburn of Oklahoma, who I consider a hero because he's trying to cut back on waste. See, there's an awful lot of things that Tom Coburn and I don't agree on. I'm a big tax cutter, and he is not. He's a big supporter of the war in Iraq, but what he is doing is he is trying to reduce the pork in the budget. You see, both parties are just shameless in taking the taxpayers' money and having earmarks to pay for things that the country doesn't need or doesn't want. And Coburn finally won one. I wrote a column in advance. I hope it had something to do with it about Hillary Clinton and Chuck Schumer getting $1 million for the Woodstock Museum in
John
upstate
McCain got a
New
good
York.
laugh line out of this at the last debate.
So I think he might be the most underappreciated. I guess my favorite politician, I just liked him because he was so smart, and I liked him so much, and I liked to go drinking with him, was Pat Moynihan. He was my favorite human being who was a politician. I don't know if he was really my favorite in his politics. My favorite, I think, in changing things, in changing the nation, was Ronald Reagan. I think he was he understood that the presidency was not a management job; it is a leadership job. He couldn't micromanage the government. Nobody can. That's what fools like Nixon and Carter and Johnson tried to do is micromanage the U.S. government.
Choose bombing targets in North Vietnam.
Yes, can't be done. And Reagan won the Cold War, revived the economy, and restored the morale of the American people. And that's why he was the only successful president in my 50 years in Washington.
Wow. I think we have time for 2 more questions, Clarissa, and then we'll get back to Mark again.
Please comment on your longtime partnership with Roland Evans.
Thank you. Good question. It's your longtime partnership with Roland.
Well, I wrote in the book that Rolly and I certainly were not close friends. We were more like brothers. And I was touched that his widow told me that I was the only person who would be delivering a eulogy other than the speech by the Episcopalian minister at his funeral.
It's a great honor.
It was a great honor. We fought every day. We used to say we fought about everything except money, but we fought about money too. But not much for money. We'd fight about what words, who got what assignments, which place to go, and we yelled at each other. But it was an interesting partnership. In writing this book, I was shocked as I read some of his oral histories given to the Kennedy Library that his relationship with Bobby Kennedy, he was having meetings with Bobby that he didn't tell me about, and he was saying things that I didn't know about, and it's all in the book. And that was a little disturbing to me after the fact, but it's hard to be a partner for somebody for 25 years and have that partnership survive. We weren't running a wholesale clothing store. You know, it wasn't just how much money we could make. We were dealing with very important issues, and we came from very different social backgrounds. I used to say the Rowley's family came over before the Mayflower, but that isn't true. They came over just a little after the Mayflower, and he was a prep school boy and went to had a governess when he was growing up, and his wife father was a multimillionaire lumber tycoon, very liberal, by the way, and from Minnesota. And so Rowley lived in a different atmosphere. He owned horses and he rode horses every weekend. And I'm a grandson of Jewish immigrants and from a wholly different social caste. And it was amazing that we did have an effective partnership and with a few bumps in the road, and it certainly was, I think it was beneficial to both of us.
Oh, that's great. Last question from Mark. Richard does have a question, if you can make it up here.
Robert, unless I misunderstood you, when in Goldwater versus Johnson, you switched parties and voted for Johnson. My former wife and I did that too, and we later greatly regretted it. Oh. And I'd like you to elaborate on your own experience of those times and the significance of them with respect to today's events.
Well, I doubt anybody's interested in my personal political history, but since you ask, I'll give it in full. I voted for Eisenhower 3 times, once in 1952 and twice in 1956. Once I was living in Indiana, covering the legislature. I voted in Indiana, and I voted absentee from my home in Illinois. And people say I shouldn't tell people that because there's no statute of limitations for voter fraud, and I could be put in prison, but I doubt they'd prosecute. Then in '60, I voted for Kennedy because I thought Kennedy was...
a lot of people voted twice for Kennedy.
Yes, some people were not even living. And I voted for Kennedy because I thought he was tougher on communism. I doubt that was really the case, but I wouldn't change the vote because Kennedy was probably the last great tax cutter in the Democratic Party. He was a better tax cutter than Nixon. And I think for the sake of the economy that the Kennedy tax cut was beneficial. We wouldn't have got that from Nixon. And Nixon was not a conservative anyway. He was a big government man, and his greatest achievement in foreign policy was selling out the Taiwan Chinese for the communist Chinese. So I was happy I voted for Kennedy in '60. In '64, I voted for Johnson. I didn't like Johnson. I thought he was a four-flusher and a devious man. But I covered Goldwater very closely. It's in there. He was next to Dirksen. He was my second best source in the Senate. And I didn't think he was a serious person. And I really sorry I voted for Johnson. I should have voted for Goldwater, and I thought that was a mistake. I think it was a mistake to try to judge, and I haven't done it since then, to judge people by their ability, their intelligence. You should vote for them whether they agree with you. Seriously, they're not. There's not that much difference between them in ability and in seriousness. What you have to do is is what do you want? Do you want big government? Do you want taxes? Do you want nation building? Which one is closer to what your model is? And Barry Goldwater, in retrospect, was even then closer to my model than Lyndon Johnson. I have voted for every Republican candidate since, happily for Ronald Reagan in 1980 and 1984, not so happily for all the rest of them. But let me say, can I just finish with one thing? I think the only two presidents in this century, the only one in my 50 years in my book that I approve of is that I think was a success was Reagan, and the only other one in the 20th century that I think felt that government was the problem instead of the solution was Calvin Coolidge. I'm a great Calvin Coolidge supporter. Calvin Coolidge was a Vermont lawyer from Vermont, and he used to keep every day of his life, he kept a ledger of how he spent every hour, and he'd take a nap. You can tell by his ledger, it's right in the Library of Congress. He used to take a big long nap every afternoon, and sometimes 2 or 3 hours. And he also liked to sleep at night. And so some 24-hour periods he'd sleep 13 hours. And you say, well, that's not so good. But there's very few presidents that can hurt the country when they're making Z's in the White House bedroom. And President Reagan didn't keep a ledger, but he was not seen around before 9 in the morning or after 5 in the afternoon. And he once told a meeting of the Gridiron Club, which is a journalist club in Washington, he said, I once heard that hard work never hurt anybody, but I sure didn't want to take a chance on it. So those were my kind of presidents, and I believe that we've had a lot of bad presidents in our time. And the American people, blessed by God, I believe, have surmounted them. They've made the best of them. I think whatever happens in this election, we'll make the best of them because John Winthrop said we were a shining city on the hill. Ronald Reagan used that phrase, and I still think that's a goal we should adhere to. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.